It can include demolishing that structure. It can include expanding footprints to bring facilities up to codes and standards. Relocations of facilities outside of the floodplain if that becomes necessary. And then there are also grant programs such as the Hazard Mitigation Program, which funds mitigation-centric construction problems to prevent damages from future events and reduce risk. So all of these types of actions generally trigger consultation under Section 106. And that's when we would initiate that process with the State Historic Preservation Office and whichever tribes, again, have areas of interest where that particular project is taking place. So I'm gonna pause right there. My last slide is just contact information for the FEMA Environmental and Historic Preservation staff, Alessandro, who again is our Regional Environmental Officer, Terry Toy, who's our Deputy Regional Environmental Officer, and then myself right there at the bottom, serving as the advisor for the current California wildfires that are under the federally declared event, and see if there are any questions. Again, I know that that's kind of probably preaching to the choir as far as this group goes, but I found that one thing that happens often with our environmental and historic preservation program is folks don't really know that we exist. Or that we're here to facilitate compliance with any applicants to FEMA funding. So I always appreciate the opportunity to let people know we're here, we're ready to help, and just welcome your feedback and welcome your questions.
Right. Well, I think there are a lot of people who do just want to ask, how do we get money for the various things that we need? In particular, there was one question that you may have seen on the chat there from Linda Rosas. Is there a way for the tribes to contract directly with CalOES and or FEMA for debris removal projects? We are finding contracts provided to tribes by subcontractors are asking for a waiver of sovereign immunity, which is unacceptable. Yes, I'm dealing with that same issue ourselves. All of our contracts and agreements say nothing in this agreement shall waive our sovereign immunity, which is a very important thing to preserve.
So I'm not sure. So one thing that's a bit of a challenge for me is that all of the contracting, of course, takes place in FEMA contracting, and we generally don't see those. I can work on identifying a point of contact to provide you all with to direct those questions, unless, Chris, you have better information about the contracting process. And I should ask for clarification. Are you specifically asking about debris removal projects within the boundaries of tribal lands, or are you speaking about debris removal on public or state land? I don't know if that will change the answer. I just want to make sure I have asked the right question. On public lands, okay. So again, apologies, I don't have an answer. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I just wanted to let you know I am a contracting officer representative, but this is definitely something that I need to take upstairs and get you the correct person that should work on this. I'm in the same situation you are. I just want to make sure that I get the correct information. So I have heard this recently from listening in on some calls with the state. So it's definitely something that has come up, but I want to make sure that I get the right people to answer for you. So I can take that on if you like, Emily. Either way, you're in.
Okay, that would be fantastic, Chris, since I think it's more a general question than one specific to this event, and since you're more in the contracting world, that would be great.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, since this is a 2-day event, I should probably be able to get you the answer by tomorrow at the latest. So I can commit to that.
And I would like to add that CalOES has stood up a debris task force that I am part of, as is Emily, and I am also a co-lead for a watershed debris flow task force for those areas in watersheds that have values at risk. So I think what I'd like to do is send Shasta some information on how the different tribal nations that have affected properties that might have an interest in either of those two task forces, how to hook up. I know that the Bureau of Indian Affairs had attended one of our first task force meetings and provided a report, so I can have our analyst get that to Shasta for distribution, but we want to be sure that you know how to connect with us. There are two phases of debris removal, and the first is household hazardous waste, and our task force can help you find the path for your impacted properties.
Yes. So that's great. I would say the number one most important thing to get out of this panel is the contact information from the participants and the points of contact. So as long as FEMA is okay, you've done your presentation, have shared your contact information, maybe I can invite Pat to go ahead with her presentation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll wait for my slide deck. My presentation is really designed for project applicants to public assistance grants or hazard mitigation grants that Emily just touched on. CalOES's role is to facilitate the application process for the FEMA funding for those areas that are impacted by the current fires that are not within the federal declaration. They may be covered under the California Disaster Assistance Act, and that would be an opportunity for the state helping out financially with some of the activities that we were just talking about, such as debris removal. So with that as an introduction, I want to talk a little bit about compliance. It's a review of what we look for in our application packages that are submitted for consideration. Ready for the next slide? Everybody may be familiar with these two pieces of law and regulation, the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. They are umbrella environmental laws under which all local, state, and federal laws and regulations are considered for a project with potential to impact the environment. And the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, is normally for federal actions such as, funding, as Emily described, and the CEQA, or California Environmental Quality Act, is generally for non-federal lands. So if the activities in your area have both federal and non-federal that might be subject to an action, you might need to look at both and understand both of the environmental laws. And those laws and regulations include executive orders, some of which Emily had identified, but also our local agencies, the zoning, planning codes, and ordinances that address specific resources in a geographic area. Ready for the next slide? this slide summarizes the laws that kind of run in parallel on the state side and the federal side, and I have aligned them so that you can see if you're considering the Federal Endangered Species Act, there might also be California listed species under the management of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And there's one set of laws, the Clean Water Act laws at the federal and state level, that often create confusion, and it's understandable. The Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act is a provision for protecting all waters within the state boundaries, of which there is a subset, navigable waterways, largely, that are managed by US EPA and US Army Corps of Engineers under the Clean Water Act. There are a couple of sections of the Clean Water Act that are actually administered by the state, and for our tribal nations, many of them might have their own Section 401 certification to administer that act on the tribal nation land. So I wanted to just point that out, because often when an application comes in, there's confusion about who's doing what. If FEMA is the lead agency, then what happens to another organization or tribal nations? How do they fit into that picture? There is one law, the California Fish and Game Code, Section 1600, that has been on the books since the 1860s, and it really was associated with the fouling of waterways from hydraulic mining, but often forgotten are the lake and streambed alteration agreements for work within our state waters, or waters of the state, and where there might be considered a federal jurisdiction, always check to see if that is something to be concerned about as well. It will come up in an EHP review, to be sure. So I'll move on to the next slide. So when the EHP review is complete, that is the only point in time that project activities or construction can begin. And this is linked to item 4, that if there is a change in a project design as it's submitted to the state and FEMA to consider, the EHP process must begin again. So when a project is designed, be sure that it's as complete as possible to reduce the iterative cycle of the EHP process. And one of the other things I wanted to call out is that sometimes in the EHP review process, the project is considered and might have categorical or statutory exemptions under CEQA or exclusions under NEPA. However, there are still other environmental laws that must be considered for that action, and most often forgotten are the local laws and some of the state laws. So be sure to look at all of the laws as you design your project, because getting to item 2, our applicants and recipients for federal and state funding are responsible for the permit applications and then obtaining the permits before construction. I'm ready for the next slide. And this is my last slide, and it's contact information. So this is how to get a hold of me. And We have developed an environmental directory and fact sheets that explain the key portions of the environmental laws that I just went over briefly. And the environmental directory has a section not only summarizing the applicable state and federal laws beyond those that both Emily and I have described, but we've also listed them in contact information of how to reach them for information and assistance. So with that, thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Yes, I think actually at this point, I think it would be fair to, we will certainly go to some questions, but I'd like to ask Dirk, would you like to talk a little bit about your participation, your experience, and you have a presentation too that Shasta can put up there.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dirk Charley, Tribal Liaison. I'm speaking from the land of the Yokuts, Joinemni land here in Fresno, where we work closely with all tribes, and it's an honor to give a perspective about what a tribal liaison does. And I'll share it from a tribal, from a hotshot foreman's perspective, public affairs, small business owner, tribal council members' perspective, various perspectives, but I'm engaging in it right now, and I look forward to sharing a burst of information. Can't make you all experts, but I can at least tell you what's happening out there. This is a picture that the Honorable Tribal Chairwoman Liz Kipp shared with me of the Big Sandy Rancheria. This is the day of the fire, that the creek fire took off. So that's the upper San Joaquin River Canyon. And our world changed as far as like what the forest looks like now. Next slide, please. So I serve as a liaison between the incident commander and local tribes and Native American groups in terms of information updates and issues of concern to the Native American community. I work closely with all incident management team liaisons. Next slide. The role of the incident management team liaison, the tribal liaison, is I work right in the middle, where in that diagram, it talks about how wildfire incident response is a network response. I'm right in the middle, right there where the incident management team is. I communicate, coordinate, and we cooperate. But as in Indian country, as in our last Central Valley Tribal Emergency Management Summit, that theme was one language, one voice, one response. And I'm honored to carry that message on for the tribal folks that have been involved in that for the past 5 years. Next slide. So I reach out. They called me. I'm already being called by tribes in the middle of the night about, hey, this fire is going. I have a really close working relationship with the Emergency Command Center. She's Native American leader. And so we already kind of look at it like that fire is going to get out of control. They're going to order a team up. But by that time, I'm already starting to communicate to the tribes. And when I arrive on an incident, per the incident commander and the area administrators, which are the forest supervisors or district rangers, they give me their direction and support to get the tribes engaged. So I carefully listen to the tribal experts, the tribal leadership, or their designated reps. And I carry their message forward in a prompt and timely manner. Time is of the essence. And I stress the importance of where the resource advisors, the teams are going to be at. I immediately team up with them. I promote and use and access all modes of social media information sharing. In that previous slide, I was on a Facebook virtual Facebook Live platform where I was able to talk about the Sequoia complex and the 9 tribes which had a keen interest in the location of the incident. The tribes here on the Western Sierra Nevada and on the Eastern Sierra Nevada. And I shared their names proudly, you know, and I wanted to be sure that the public knows that we're engaged, and those cultural lands, sacred lands, they're very important to people. But again, for the tribal community, the safety and welfare of our firefighters in our community is #1. I also, when I promote use of the social media, one of the first things I talk about is go to the evacuation links. They're usually county sheriffs, and to guide them through that, walk them through it, talk them through it. You know, there's a lot of action going on, and they need the best of the best communication as swiftly as they can get it. Next slide. So, executive briefings are a must. These were requested by the incident commanders, and I worked with 1, 2, 3 of them, 4 of them, 5 I think, and the area administrators. So they're already telling me they want to reach out and they need some upper level formal consultation type executive briefings to occur. So I take my direction, and we respect tribal sovereignty, and we remember the Central Valley Tribal Emergency Management Summits that we held in the past. You know, we're not strangers, Indian country. We're partners. They know us. And in this particular slide, we're showing the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone intertribal briefing that was hosted there in Lone Pine, where we had the incident commander from the Northern Rockies team, Mike Patricia, him and his liaisons and area administrators come and give the best of the best information to tribal leadership. And then on that one side there, we're at tribal chambers of the Tule River Indian Reservation, tribal council briefing with the CalFire Team 6 and the Northern Rockies team. So again, all the decision makers, fiduciary decision makers, are at the table, and they're given the best of the best. And you know, with us, we had Bureau of Indian Affairs, we had CalFire, Park Service, and BLM. These are the types of people that tribal community, especially leadership, they need to know and hear and communicate with directly. And that was just one meeting of one briefing of many that occurred. Again, when I think about these coordinating between the tribes, I let them know where the incident command posts are, and they are most welcome. It's an honor for me to meet and greet them and escort them and introduce them to the decision makers, the incident commanders, operations folks, the resource advisors. You know, those are the important people that we must provide that contact for. Next slide, please. So again, I remind the tribal community and everything, using my firefighting background, is that you never forget about the extremely dangerous conditions that are still occurring. Patience and timing means a lot, okay, in an operational period. Evacuations are happening. There's shifting winds, extreme weather, things that we've never seen before. So access and escape routes and safety zones, they change frequently. So, you know, when we're dealing with the media, it's not that we don't want to share the information, but there's only one way in and one way out. And trees do fall over, and now you're trapped. If you don't have a line going assignment up there, then you don't want to contribute to that. So, you know, be patient, but we also tell you be ready. This is 2 slides that I included. The one on the left is the Sequoia complex when it was barreling down toward Camp Nelson. Another one was the day that the creek fire took off and traveled a long ways and caused an incredible fire behavior. Next slide. So I'll do my best to gain an understanding of what I need to consult about and, you know, with who. So, you know, I've got connections, and I ask people is that, you know, maybe I should go see this from above. And well, I'm glad I did, because it gave me better a perspective about where Monachi Mountain is, you know, where Turkey Meadows is, you know, the north, south, east, west, you know, what boundary is that? Park Service, BLM, Forest Service. Okay, Forest Service Sequoia, Forest Service Inyo. Okay, I got it, you know, and those are the areas that I, in my experience, I have knowledge of these areas before. I worked in them and everything, but I also heard that from my elders, and I also heard that from our tribal, you know, histories and story telling. So I always try to get the grand picture of things. Now I know what to consult about. And this way, this fire is in such a remote area. We flew it, and I learned a lot. Next slide. So as a tribal liaison, I do my best to try to communicate ahead of time the incident objectives, you know, the general control and management objectives, you know, what happens next? And, you know, right now the fires are still being fought. We're talking about suppression repair, you know, of the dose lines and the values at risk or values that were impacted, and then tribal mitigation measures and involvement, etc. In these slides, it shows the actions that were taken to protect tribal citizens' homes. You know, and again, I appreciate Liz Kipp sharing these pictures. But when you put dozers there to save homes, and they're at night it's on a night shift or something, you don't know if they ran over their water infrastructure. You know, usually a lot of the tribal folks are up ahead, and they're sharing that information early, and which is how you protect your burial grounds and your fence lines, and you know, maybe a gathering area and everything. So as a tribal liaison, I hear and I get this information, and I tell people, those people who need to know, they can make operational plans and tactics, and they can modify them. And again, when it's all said and done, if it ever gets that. But anyway, when we go out, we will coordinate site visits to areas of tribal importance, but we will always have safety first. I will never take anybody out on the line unless I can do my utmost best to guarantee their safety. And but we'll get the job done. We'll do it in a good way. Next slide. So the importance of having a tribal liaison. I'm just one of maybe 3 or 4, and I've asked to have tribal strike teams of tribal liaison strike teams, because a tribal liaison, like I would have performed for Liz Kipp, Big Sandy Rancheria tribal chairwoman, is I would have been that person up front and center to help the tribes. I worked for the incident commanders and the area administrators. And they utilize my skills and experience and my knowledge of who I know. And but I'm also that buffer between the tribes and incident management teams. I know people. You know, when I say they, meaning the liaisons know people. They know the lay of the land. They know the business owners. They know who's going to be at the cooperators meeting. I bring that expertise and knowledge about. I know who's representing the tribal council. I know who's representing the tribal fire management organization. I know who's representing the tribal cultural specialist work. You know, the tribal GIS gurus and everybody, and they have that type of connection. And it's good that you know, I would know the natural resource directors and the elders reps, right? Who knows the land the best? They've been on Earth the longest, you know. So I'll do my best as a 24/7 kind of guy to you know, attend all the briefings, go to all the cooperators meetings, you know, bring it to their attention that we're in contact with 9 tribes. This is their sacred area. You know, we have direct contact. We've beefed up the contact list. You know, we know what they're going to want to know and how they're going to be more involved in it. And that's some of the things that my job is to bring that solid intel back to the tribal leaders who are focused on the safety and security of their citizens, their community. And I act in a way to help offset, you know, time management for tribal leaders, because the tribal leaders consider the stressful situations they're dealing with, right? They got to take control and ensure members have adequate needs to survive. The housing, the food, where they're going to be set up in the hotels, the special medical needs, you know. Those are the types of things, though, that I, as a liaison, if I can offset that and help them, again, take care of their cultural resources and their ancestral homelands, well, I do. Again, liaisons provide helpful information such as, you know, the maps, the incident action plan, notification of upcoming events, briefings. How do you get onto that Facebook live virtual community meeting? I handle questions and I get answers 24/7. You know, I share tribal recommendations and connections. Make it better. You know, we know we're going to have to fix the land afterwards. Well, why not make it better? You know, the fire might have burned all the way up to this point. Why don't we burn it over a little bit more? Okay, that's all right. You know, that's a good thing. Next slide. Fire season is not over. The specter of COVID-19 lingers over all aspects of emergency management situations. Share all safety messages with your community and coworkers. Be kind to each other, my friends. It matters. Couldn't make you guys all experts in the world of tribal liaison work, but I love to train people in this line of work. I share position descriptions. I want to do everything I can to be a good tribal liaison and help our tribal community. Ta-da! Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those wonderful presentations. Yes, thank you, that's great. I was just looking up the chat. We don't actually have too many extra questions except the comments from Sally and Linda do want to get into those debris removal task force. Is it household hazardous waste? Pat, do you have any more things to say about those services that you can offer? Debris task flow force and watershed debris flow task force. Go ahead.
Sure. The watershed debris flow task force is a facilitative group to match state and federal resources available to meet unmet needs of local or impacted agencies. And we have a Northern California task force meeting on Tuesdays beginning at 10:30. And I just put my contact information, my email in the chat. And the first time I entered it, there was a typo. Gov is without the E, so watch that suffix there. So the watershed debris flow task force, I think, would be relevant for those representing sensitive areas with values at risk, homes, community centers that might be disrupted if there were floods or rock or tree debris moving downstream. So it's a good way to connect with those agencies that can provide flood kits, technical assistance to assist with siting deflective structures to protect community resources. The debris task force has been set up to monitor what the needs are for household hazardous waste removal. And I am a participant in that task force, but if you get me the information, I can send that to our team leads so that you can learn what is happening across the state to address these programs that are administered through the DTSC largely and CalRecycle. The phase 2 debris removal is something all of the participating agencies are preparing for, and that occurs phase 2 after the emergency response phase. So it's there's no line in the sand with regard to dates because we still have ongoing fires, and those need to be evaluated by our federal and state agencies responsible for identifying the values at risk. So hopefully that's enough to whet your appetite. If you're interested in participating or learning more, send me an email. I'll hook you up.
Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask FEMA if you had anything else to sort of color in that picture from the federal side.
Oh, sorry, I had to find the mute button. I don't know that I have anything relevant right now about these current wildfires, which I know is probably what folks are pretty interested in. FEMA's, we're pretty early on in those events. Decisions have not yet been made, as Pat noted about that phase 2. So unfortunately, we don't have much information at this point to share. But I would urge you, if you do have, questions, comments, concerns, if you see something that concerns you and you'd like to check in with us, again, I shared my contact information. Please feel free to reach out, and I will do what I can to get answers for everybody's questions.
That's great. Thank you. So I wanted to change tack actually, yeah, I will change tack in a minute. I'll bring up one thing that Dirk mentioned yesterday on the call is, maybe you've addressed it, but I just wanted to see whether you wanted to say more about this, is that the disaster response doesn't just impact cultural resources, but it actually impacts people. And I've certainly experienced that within my tribe, that is very ironically, tragically, the director of housing at the tribe is homeless, like the head of fiscal is homeless, the head of our grants and contracts is homeless, and it's got and then there are many tribal members have lost their homes too in that Happy Camp Slater fire. It's got to have an effect on not just people's work, but their lives. Dirk, do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Again, as a liaison, I'm not just like thinking about what's happening out there in the forest cultural resource. They're very important, very important. But I'm thinking about, from a tribal council's perspective, how am I going to keep my people fed? What about their medicines, transportation, Wi-Fi? All these kids on laptops and everything. Are they going to have that over there? Did we guarantee that the tribe is going to all go to one hotel? Or are they going to go to like Visalia, Madeira, and they're scattered? And so you got them scattered throughout. And I've had to evacuate my mom before, and it's very hard. After 7 days of being at my house, my mom was wanting to go back, but there was no way that I'd take my mom back. It was thick smoke. I mean, you could even see across the fence line, I couldn't say the field out in the mountain. But anyway, it was just intolerable. But the other part of it was, you've got tribal councils are responsible for the safety and welfare of the people. When they're busy just living in hotels, and they're so disruptive too, all the more reasons why to have a liaison there working with their tribal's designated rep to do this. But I want to stress the importance of what the Central Sierra Nevada tribes have been doing. Since 2016, we've had the Tribal Emergency Management Summits. We've dealt with the Washington office, FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security, top officials of CalFire, Caltrans, all the county sheriffs, California Native National Army Air National Guard, and that's just to name a few. And I got to give it to the American Red Cross. Without them, we could have not have done this jointly, and it's paid off. It's helped us by having, but because we got involved early in 2016, 2017, 2018, we took a break because of the Ferguson fire and all the fires that were happening. But in 2019, that was hosted by Tule River Indian Reservation. So again, we brought all these Washington state, nationwide speakers to come and talk about emergency management planning. One thing that we always talked about, but we never went into in depth, was what about pandemic? And
yes, I was just about to ask.
we didn't even think about that. So this was one of the things, though, that when you talk about evacuation, you're not talking about putting 100 people into the gymnasium. You're talking about spacing and this and that. Not all families feel welcome to come and join them, for safe harbor, because they're, like I said, the specter of COVID-19. And those are the types of things, though, that, how can tribes offer self harbor to other tribes when they're busy looking for safe harbor? And so those are the types of things, though, that with adequate training, with the experts like Dory Beats, with like Liz Kipp, with the leadership of Tule River and my own tribes and everything, we got to get involved. And as per a letter I saw from Liz Kipp, was she was very proud of her people. Over 90% of them were ready to go. They knew and they understood. And that's where good training comes. Tribal leaders, you're responsible for training your own people. Guys like me, I become like a familiar face. They know me, they see me with that tribal connection. And but see, when you do the liaison work, you have to be there in person. Okay, they want to see a human, and I can't stress that more. But when I'm there, I'm like, tell me about tribal areas, values at risk. So we're talking about about their infrastructure, their water, their casino, their sacred places, their tribal health clinics, their roadways, their giant spirits, also known as the giant sequoia redwoods, and their ranch lands, their fence lines, their roads. You don't get that over a phone or emailing and everything. You got to go communicate, which means you got to try. If you're going to be a liaison, you got to be a 24/7 kind of guy, go-getter, and not afraid to speak on television or get in front of a large group of people. It's an interesting line of work, but I need more tribal liaisons.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for that. Appreciate it. Okay.
Alex, I have a question about since you all brought up COVID. This is more of a FEMA question, but there's been a lot of there's been CARES Act funding, of course, and under the CARES Act, it looks like in some instances there's been a waiver of environmental review, and that includes review under the National Historic Preservation Act. So I don't know if that's something that our FEMA folks can speak to, since they're on sort of more on the side of providing funding and going through the applications for reimbursement and all that. But can you say anything about whether or not FEMA money or CARES Act money is being used to say develop an emergency operations center, build that sort of a building, and it doesn't have to go through Section 106 review?
So I can address that comment, Shasta. That's actually a great question. I can't necessarily speak to the CARES Act because I'm not familiar with what work is being done under that. But I do know that for any of the FEMA funded projects in response to COVID-19 that are funded by the federal agency, we have not waived the National Historic Preservation Act. They did negotiate through FEMA headquarters, the ACHP and THPO, a very streamlined process, which I know everybody has probably heard of and is familiar with, but it is not waived. It's a very streamlined process. I can let you know that for FEMA Region 9, and I think nationally, but I would have to check on nationally, for FEMA Region 9, there have not been any projects that we are aware of at this point that have involved ground disturbing activity. We've been communicating very consistently, both with the FEMA funding programs and applicants as questions come up, to ensure that we get ahead of that should it take place, so that we can initiate that very expedited process. But the National Historic Preservation Act is still very much in effect for projects funded by FEMA.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And you are right, there is a streamlined process.
Yes.
Yeah, and the idea was that most of the response that would need to be done would not have anything to do with any sort of ground disturbing activity. But as this thing grinds on into what looks like it's going to be a second year, it may well be that there needs to be building of infrastructure for, say, vaccine administration or expansion of hospital wards and that kind of thing. And that expedited review is still going to apply. And actually THPO tried to kind of put the brakes on that, and we're not successful. So thanks for the clarification.
Sure, and I will say, I mean, I don't think it will alleviate anybody's concerns, because I'm well aware of the concerns, but we have been, like I said, in very close coordination with our partners in any of those projects that I think exceed what we have seen in the past, which is just use of existing facilities, setting up temporary facilities and parking lots, etc. That we should hopefully be made aware of it well in advance, and be able to follow that streamlined process.
Thank you.
We're tracking it very closely, but I appreciate the question.
Yeah, I actually have a confession on that. on that issue, which is that we did make some comments on this streamlined review process with FEMA, but in the end, we incorporated a lot of your improved language into our own emergency response agreements, because we need to set up a community garden on a property that was kind of within a National Register property. So we used some of the same language for that. So that, I mean, basically to show that the tribe was holding itself to the same standards that the federal government was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you very much for spelling that out. I don't really see any more questions here, though I'm so thrilled that you've been here. I'm getting a little tired. It's getting, before I hand off to Shasta, I just want to say thank you very much to all of the panelists in this panel and from the previous panel, and for making it a pretty easy thing and making the experience nothing like the dream that I had that woke me up at 4:30 this morning when I had a surprise visitor, Donald Trump, who I had to also moderate in this panel. That was enough to wake me up early this morning. So thank you very much for making it nothing like that.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for the reminder of the dream. That just sounds horrifying, and I'm sorry you had to deal with that while you were supposed to be getting peaceful slumber. So we've reached the end of day one, and thank you all so much for making it so simple and for participating, and to our wonderful panelists throughout the day. Please, everybody, come back tomorrow. We're starting again at 8 o'clock. We'll have a couple of polls to wake you up and get things started. But with that, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.